All right, well, Troy, please help me welcome Scott, and you've got Scott's bio in the program. I will say one of the fun things about doing these events is they often arise out of discussions where it's a fun coffee and like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did something like, and that happened for this in two ways. Natalie and I were having coffee over at Brewing Market, and I was like, God, would love to get some of your research and thinking up in front of a group. And the same thing in terms of Scott had me out to Spectranetics, was talking about his views on hiring and then also employee development and how important that is to him. And what struck me that really stood out to me was the intentionality that Scott clearly takes with respect to this. Delighted to have you here, Scott. Take it away.
Thanks, Brad. Good evening, everybody. I am going to talk about my favorite topic in the whole world, and that is all things people, and along with that, finding a clicker. Oh, is it over here?
No.
So my favorite topics in business are people and culture. And specifically, how do you operationalize your culture through what you do from a people standpoint? Thank you so much. As I said earlier, and I think Natalie mentioned this, it's probably the most underappreciated and underleveraged tool in the toolbox of how you win in the marketplace. My personal experience as it relates to that over 25 plus years in business is every single one of my bosses measured revenue, every single one of them measured earnings per share, not one of them measured culture in a thoughtful way. And the other anecdotal experience that I have in terms of interacting with CEOs across industry, when the conversation of culture comes up, I think Ashley talked about this, the conversation immediately turns to how people feel, as opposed to a competitive weapon that you have to use to win in the marketplace. So I have spent a career thinking about this and operationalizing it, and it's just my pleasure to be here with you to share a few thoughts. I'm going to grossly simplify the path that most all companies have taken, and interestingly, Ashley shared the path of Workday. Aneel Bhusri, who's the CEO that Ashley mentioned, was one of my best friend in middle school. We lived across the street from one another in Medfield, Massachusetts. But the course that most businesses take is they start with an idea, sometimes a good one, and the culture of that company, as Brad mentioned, reflects the personality of the founder or founders. And I am a co-founder of a company that we started about 7 years ago. So I've got a day job, public company CEO, and kind of a night and weekend job with a startup here in the Boulder area. So that is generally the first thing that happens. And then it's kind of binary. Either the company succeeds and kind of grows, or it fails. Lots of interesting stuff in failure, and that's not necessarily an endpoint. But let's talk about and spend time on what happens when a company is on some version of its path to success. The things that accompany growth, there's lots of things that accompany growth, but three almost invariably do. The company gets bigger, so the scale increases. The company gets more complex as it grows, and the risk profile of the company expands as the business grows, right? New lines of business. I'm going to play in different countries, different markets around the world. Those three things, scale, risk, complexity, they warrant our consideration as leaders of companies, right? Also, a little bit overly simplified, the way that we deal with that, it's not totally binary, there's gradation here, but generally speaking, companies either lean hard on the people part, people, values, culture, or they lean hard on policy and procedure. The vast majority of companies out there, Natalie probably has data on this, I don't, but the vast majority of companies out there lean on the latter. Kind of makes sense. We live in the United States. highly litigious society that we live in. Many industries, medical devices, highly regulated. Also, I think as human beings, we probably learn more from negative experiences when we first touch that hot stove. We're very much wired, and I think it's reinforced to live that way. And I think, some aggregate amount of those things lead to more policies-based than people-based in terms of how we manage the growth and byproduct of growth that's out there. I would contend there is way more upside on the people path, way more upside, but you have to be a monster at all things people to do that. Your talent curve, your judgment curve, your people curve, if you will, has to be steeper than your growth and complexity curve if you're going to compete in that fashion. I think it's also safer in some ways. We see companies being disrupted left and right, and we all know that the rate of change is increasing. And that's only going to continue to accelerate in our lifetime. Last week, Tesla became more valuable than GM and Ford, right? It's crazy, the rate of change. So I personally think the people path is superior, in some ways, not all, less risky, and I think there's way more upside. Let me share with you an example that I have been using. Our team knows that I've been using this example for a very long period of time that I think is relatable to all of us in terms of two companies in the same industry, same regulatory environment, same customers, same everything. One who operationalizes culture as a competitive weapon, and one that relies heavily on people, heavily on policy and procedure. And I was given a great gift a week ago in talking about this, because the example that I've used for about a decade is United versus Southwest. Honest to goodness, they'll attest. It's pretty extraordinary. And before last week, what I used to rely on in talking about United Airlines was the fact that my brother-in-law has been a pilot at United for a very long period of time. His wife is a flight attendant at United. All of the cliches apply. Don't think they're in here. I used to rely on my own personal experience as a United customer. I've flown about 2 million miles on United, and I would lean on my experience and my insights via my brother-in-law and his wife in terms of how policy and procedure-based they are as a company. But we were given a gift, weren't we, in some ways, over the past little bit of time. We can now talk about leggings, right? We can now talk about fear of flying taking on a completely different meaning. We used to fear water landing. Now sitting on the tarmac has its own personal injury risk, right? And we all know that at companies with lots of people, and United has lots of people, stuff can happen. A rogue person can go off track and embarrass a company. But we're talking about here the CEO of the company. And the CEO, Oscar Munoz, sat down in the midst of a crisis and wrote an email to his employees. And I am guessing it probably went something like this, because I do this frequently, communicating, right, Ashley? You sit down, you write the email, you read it out loud, you edit it, you bring somebody in and say, hey, am I hitting the mark with this? Before you hit send to something that's going to go to thousands of people to make sure you hit the mark. His email said, in part, supporting the actions that happened, good job to his employees, the E word, I'm going to touch on that in a second, for following established procedures. So thought about it, reinforced what happened, following established procedures. I think they fall into that category of companies that are governed by policy and procedure. Then the thing went crazy, right? There was already hundreds of millions of views before he sent that email of the video that we have all seen. Then they hired a PR firm, and I don't know which one. Then he wrote a letter to me Sorry, and to others, I'm sure, on Friday of last week. Dear Mr. Drake, I've heard a lot of understandable anger and disappointment this week from customers, and as one of our most valued, I want to be sure you heard directly from me. The awful event that occurred on Flight 3411 has elicited many responses from our customers. Anger, outrage, disappointment. I share all of these sentiments. For me personally, I'd add shame. No one should ever be mistreated this way, ... I want to apologize to you sincerely for not living up to the values that you expect. ... Last paragraphs, our values will guide everything we do. So I would contend values, culture, people, more upside, and when the stuff hits the fan, that's right where the experts go. Imagine if you had more of a judgment and people and values-based culture, the difference that would have happened over the past couple of weeks at United Airlines. It is extraordinary. Don't tell me that culture is soft. It's a competitive weapon. Now let's talk about a positive example in the form of Southwest Airlines. Southwest Airlines, their logo is a heart. They talk about love. How many companies talk about love other than like eHarmony and, you know, not many companies talk about love. They love their team. They love their customers. They even love luggage, right? Bags fly free. They use words like transparency. Everything that they do speaks to us, is intentional about how they want us to experience them as a company. And if you fly around a bunch like I do, I pay attention to this stuff because you can tell I get a little jazzed up about it. Not at every airport, but many of them, under the Southwest logo, you'll see their tagline that says, we are all ambassadors of our culture. It's a beautiful thing. So, to my CEO friends that think it's all warm and fuzzy, I would say not quite. It may be a byproduct of their culture that we feel good about them and their team feels good about them. But has anybody studied Southwest Airlines in terms of knowing what single metric matters more than any other in their company? The whole organization is bent around it. Anybody know what that is? I am. Turn time at the gate. I thought I was the only geek in the room. Thank you. I got a couple people that read that stuff and geek out on it too. Turn time at the gate. Think about their airline. They have one kind of plane. They know how to fly it and fix it. Think about how we board a Southwest flight. It's not 34E, it's A, B, and C, and little pods within each one of those letters. Do you think that's happenstance, or have they studied how we as human beings board an airplane? And watch it. When you see somebody that's moving slowly, somebody with a bad leg or somebody that's a little bit older, whatever the case might be, or if they're messing around, one of their employees, one of their teammates will smile at that person, they'll help them with their bag, and they'll get them into a chair. They'll help put their luggage away. Flight attendant, pilot, they're all working on turn time at the gate. That is operationalizing culture. More market cap expansion, more wealth created by Southwest Airlines than any other company in the history of the airline industry. Pretty stark examples. Let me tell you just a little bit about Spectranetics, our company, cardiovascular medical device company based in Colorado, about 1,000 teammates today, based down in Colorado Springs. We're public. 6 years ago, when we first got to the company, we were quasi on the success part of the binary equation that I had, but at risk. We had achieved at that time about $100 million in revenue, but growth was flat. There was no strategic plan in the company. There was no intensity around people. The culture of the company was completely adrift. The two prior CEOs behaved kind of poorly. One was indicted. So it was a pretty interesting time to be at the company. We figured we better do something, right? And we thought we had an opportunity, so we gathered together. Donna was there. Rob, you weren't there, were you? We gathered together as a team, about the top 50 people from around the world, and we had real work to do. In a 2.5-day period of time, we said we were going to define our mission, vision, shared values, aspirational, I think now, Natalie. I didn't have that word before. And we were going to put a big stake in the ground on a peak that was high enough to scare us, but also attainable. So we did that. And at that meeting, we declared 4 things would guide the path of our company that we would be wickedly accountable to over the course of time. And of those 4 things, we said one is more important than any other because it pervades the other 3. And in fact, I would say to you guys, the most important thing that we do as a company is the most important thing that you do as a company. And I would take it a step further and say, it's the most important thing any competing entity does. For-profit company, philanthropy, or a basketball team. And every single teammate in our company can tell you what I'm about to say in the next few slides. The most important thing that we do as a company, will you guys help me, is attract, retain, you guys are, this is awful, is attract, retain, and develop the top talent on the planet. We began with planet Earth. The most important thing we do, I would tell you, if we do that well and better than our competitors, we'll win, nothing else matters. Promise you those words are true. Now, how do you operationalize that? When you take that issue out of the theoretical, when you hear knucklehead CEOs talk all the time, take the issue out of the theoretical into the practical. CEOs talk about people and culture. Show me your calendar over the last 90 days. I'll tell you what's important to you. Do you live it? How much time, and do you know how much time you spend on ARD? Do you measure goofy things like who are your net talent exporters? Who's running a department or function that is exporting people to other parts of the organization? What is the highest net promoter score and willingness to recommend score in the whole company? Who are those leaders and how are they doing it? ARD, the most important thing any competing entity does, live it. Make your calendar prove it. With the right team, we operate with wicked strategic clarity. We say wicked for 2 reasons. One, I'm from Boston, and I root for all of the correct teams. Get a lot of grief for that. 2, it's memorable. And like I said earlier when we were engaging as a panel, for us, the 12 and the 6 is people, the 3 and the 9 is strategy. We've gotten really good at asking the question of our team and our customers, what can we do to delight you? We call them our vital few and our key drivers. Those are the only things that we resource. Everything else gets starved. The consequence of that is those 6, maybe 7 things max, we do. If we say it, we do it. There's no mystery. We don't peanut butter and try to do 30 things poorly. We do 6 things really well, and we're successful. In Donna's business, the biggest thing that we've taken on is taking mortality off the table in a lead extraction procedure. Pacemaker, defibrillator, our job is to take mortality off the table. She's in the midst of doing that. It's that big. And the further thing that I would encourage you to think about as we talk about operationalizing all of this stuff, people and culture, is align your team. We take our strategy that didn't exist before, and some of you have seen them, that they're that thick and they're dusty, BS. We put it on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, 1 piece of paper. Every teammate in the company has it. It's also on our website for people younger than me. So everybody knows, whether you're the CEO or the sales rep or the receptionist, how does my job align and relate to the 6 most important things that we're doing? Complete alignment. Yeah, but Scott, if somebody leaves tomorrow, your strategy's going with them. Yep, no problem. Try to stop us. We will succeed at those things that we say we're going to do. Third, with the right team and strategy, we execute as if lives depend on it, because indeed in our case, they do. It is so our pleasure, my pleasure. The reason I do what I do every day when I get up, when my feet hit the floor, I swear to you, my first thought is, I get to help save and improve lives. I love what I do. And that execution that we're so serious about has tripled the size of the company in the past 6 years. Our enterprise value has increased 8-fold. We're public. You can buy stock, but you can't say that I told you to buy stock. The vitality index of the company that we didn't even measure 6 years ago, lifeblood of a medical device company is the pipeline of new products and clinical data. It was 4.5%. 4.5% of our revenue was represented by products launched in the last 36 months. Translation, we had nothing going on. Today, it's over 25% and growing rapidly. And the bookend of ARD, Track, Retain, Develop, if you want to do that well, you better be very thoughtful and purposeful about your culture. We are maniacal about this. In business, we know that we get what we measure and honor most. Incredibly important. These guys can tell you how many Compass Awards do we give away. That's just for living our shared values. Has nothing to do with the business outcome. How do we honor that behavior? We send people on trips with a loved one who live our shared values in an inspirational way. How do you operationalize your culture such that you know exactly what is going on? You better ask, right? I think that's what we heard. We also at that meeting, I don't know if we have too many, Natalie. 3, 7.
You're good. You're good.
Okay, we're good. But to give you an idea of how this came about, this nice is worth thing wasn't what we originally had. We had a set of shared values that we agreed we would live and we would hold ourselves accountable to throughout our process of living with one another as teammates. But we recognized in those surveys that we do time and again that we kept hearing back these really distressing words. There were people that would describe what they called the tile world. That's where our production floor teammates work, and the carpeted world, where fancy people like them work. And there was clearly this disconnect that our teammates were giving voice to. And so we had to get underneath that to truly understand what that meant. And what we learned is that there was this sense of difference, the we-they, that's so bad inside of a company. And what we decided to add after a whole bunch of work was the shared value of humility. Born of the fact that we are all human beings and we are equal as human beings. We may not make the same amount of money. The marketplace dictates how much a public company's CEO makes, and the marketplace dictates how much an R&D or sales rep, R&D engineer or sales rep makes, but we are still all perfectly equal as human beings, and we've seen that improve over time. This list may change, it will live and breathe. You don't want it to change too often, but it is in fact updated. Our mission statement, we believe everything speaks together. One of our shared values, make, ownership, action, Spectranetics, the best company on the planet to be a part of, not to work for. We think that's very material difference. Working for is top down, it's hierarchical, it's exclusive. Working with includes constituencies such as our customers, such as our vendor partners, such as patients. Who are we without customers and patients, right? Everything speaks. We also believe, and I touched on this earlier, the E word I can't stand. Employees are teammates who have stolen from us. Employees pick up a check after they do a job. Teammates act like owners. Teammates give me and receive feedback. Teammates want to make a real contribution to something that they very much feel a part of. I could talk lots on that. The other thing that we're really clear about, you guys, is we say the same thing in every room. Whether it's a room full of shareholders at an investor conference, a whole bunch of customers at an industry conference or a teammate town hall meeting. Say the same thing in every room. The most important constituency that we have, I think Anil mentioned this, we are completely clear on, it's teammates. And the shareholder can say, well, you guys are a for-profit public company. Your purpose for existence is to provide a return. And the customer could say, your purpose for existing is to solve my needs. They're right. But think about it. How do you do that, right? You do that by having the best talent on the planet, ARD, and you train those people better than any of your competitors to make them more confident and capable. You show up when life happens, because it does, good things and bad things, and we make great effort to show up when life happens so our team knows we're beside them and behind them. That team is in a great position to serve customers, and in service to our customers then partner with patients. Say the same thing in every room, and that helps us live our vision, which is to manage every lead, to save every limb, and to restore every vessel. Thank you guys very much.
Okay, so for the remaining 15 minutes, we're going to open up the Q&A. I'm going to invite Ashley and Natalie to provide quick thoughts on some of Scott's content. Before we do so, Ethan is going to have the microphone, and we'll call on someone, and then if you could hand the microphone back after your question, we'll have him go to the next person so we can keep things moving. Scott, my daughters play tennis competitively. Before matches, I want you to give the pep talk. Natalie, your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Scott, for sharing that. I think the main thought I had as you were talking is really recognizing what a tremendous amount of work and focus it takes to really play out the kind of intentionality that you clearly are driving with your teammates and your organization. I think oftentimes when cultures are incredibly well driven and fostered and nurtured and encouraged, it actually looks almost easy because it feels so good. And for me, when I see and hear that, I think I really appreciate just how much you all are doing to create the kind of culture that you're living. And so I just really applaud you for that.
Thank you.
It's not only powerful for your teammates, but very powerful for the community in which you operate and for the customers that benefit from that experience.
Very kind.
Ashley,
Team, credit to you.
I would just say I think you are every HR person's dream CEO. Seriously, when all of us are in school and we're reading about how important the people component is, it is all of those things. It is because it is the part that brings you your competitive advantage so you can be successful in business. And if CEOs across the globe would recognize that power and harness it in the way that you clearly do, I think we'd see a lot more successful organizations, and the world would probably be a better place for all of it.
Thank you.
But it was really, it's inspiring to hear, and you should never have a problem attracting fantastic HR people.
All right, so let's spin the balance on Q&A, and everything's open game for the whole evening, including Scott's as well as Natalie and Ashley's work. Let's start here.
Hi, thank you. Natalie, I had a question about, you were talking about personalities, and I was just curious, do you find, and I don't know exactly, like if you, like you were saying, like use DISC to group personalities together, but do you find that certain personality types value similar things? So then if you build out an organization that has like equal amount of personalities, then you have like people valuing, different things.
Yeah, that's a great question. During one of the breaks I was having a conversation with another attendee about wiring. And so a couple things. I think that people are so unique that we tend not to fit into really simplistic boxes as much as people like me who study how people are wired wish that that were the case. And certainly people running businesses, it would be much more straightforward in terms, how to grow a culture, how to man it, how to support your people in terms of how they're wired, which is really what I'm focusing on as we're building out our technology at Achievers. Is how do you really support employees based on how they're wired? We did a study at RoundPeg that looked at the entire database that we had of individuals in terms of their core values. And we looked at every individual versus every other individual, their top 9 and bottom 9 values. And what we found, we looked at 720 million dyads, pairings, an individual versus their boss, a colleague versus a colleague. And we found that only 3 dyads, 3 pairs, had the same exact top and bottom 9 values. And actually, I wrote an HBR article on that. And the byline was, you're not 1 in a million, you're 1 in 250 million. We're so unique. So these attributes that someone would say, well, how could that person be that and that? Yeah, that's how we're wired as people. And so it's fantastic. It makes us really interesting and allows great things to happen in the business and science and entrepreneurial world, but it also makes supporting and organizing people a little complicated. And so I think it's really great to use tools to try to understand more about people, absolutely, because otherwise it is a big sort of fog out there. But I think we also have to recognize that people are really unique, and so mostly we need to understand from them what they need and how best to support them, and know that, creating either the last thing I'll say is either the concept of let's have a full, fully well-rounded organization where we have people who are all wired very differently. Well, it turns out that doesn't work very well because that ends up being anarchy and chaos. And the other end of the spectrum where we hire people who all look exactly the same in terms of everywhere. Well, 1, it's pretty impossible because we are so complex. And 2, then we would have, we wouldn't have any diversity of thought. So I land in the middle where we want to create some glue. That's why that 4 to 6, 7, you guys, I think you're both at 7 or 8, was awesome. We worked with organizations that you all know of, publicly traded companies with greatly espoused values that have 17 values. And so, but some glue, a small amount of glue that does bring us together. And then that allows for a lot of diversity and thought to happen. That's additive. I don't know if I exactly answered your question, but I think, yeah.
So in Colorado here, we'd say like, oh, work-life balance, we're like, no, it's life-work balance. That's kind of how we categorize it. But do you have any resources of like, if you were to do a survey, with a list of values, like, do you have any ideas where you can kind of like hone down, because you say, oh, life-work balance, what it means for me is totally different. Like maybe I want to work at 9 o'clock at night from home. Maybe I want to turn off my phone and leave work at the office. So, and that's for any of you, any ideas about like where you can get a list of values, like hone it
Quick
down?
responses on that one?
I mean, I would, I talked with a few people at the break about this too. There are open source, like opportunities for open source data. Look online for values. You want really simple building blocks, and you do, if you're measuring, you need to define them, because it really doesn't matter what the definition is, because then people can vote in or vote out. So you say work-life balance, I think, in our company, we want to understand which of these values are most important to you. Here's what work-life balance means, so that then people can decide, yeah, that's not really what it means for me, and so no, that's not important to me. Yeah.
Brad, I'll just say something really quick if I could. I think 2 things are really important there. What the values are, I think the fact that that it reflects the team, and they feel ownership and they see their fingerprints on them, I think is critically important, maybe more so than what they are. And 2, you have to live them. Right? And I think you have to measure that indeed you are living them. Enron had values on their wall, including integrity, excellence, communication. I forget the other one, Carol. We were talking about it. You're better off not having values and just being a normal company and not having that thing on the wall than having that stuff on the wall that you don't live, because the hypocrisy element is so great. And then people question even more.
Hi, I'm James Smith from Invited Home. I had a question. With two of you with thousands of employees, and obviously, Natalie, you've consulted to a lot of large companies. With new employees, is there something, obviously you don't get to interview everyone anymore, so is there something that when you see them around your company or you meet them for the first time that you can point to and say, given 48% of them end up failing, or forget which side it is, Natalie, of 50%, but in the first 18 months, is there something you can point to culturally that you can say, like, hey, that person's really got it around here? And maybe the three of you have a different answer to all that, but.
Let's start.
I think we focus, and this kind of gets back to what you said a little bit too, is we focus a lot on the behaviors. So, we spend our time working on and getting this from our employees. We actually do call them workmates, but we don't consider employees a bad word. But we don't mean it in a derogatory fashion. But we focus on a lot on what are the behaviors associated with customers being one of our values. What does that look like here? Here are the behaviors. And so I think it is easy to see in action people who are demonstrating those behaviors, because that's a really tangible thing. And also it gives all of us a common way of thinking about it and looking for it. It also is a common way to say to a new employee who's coming in, these are the types of things, when we say customers matter, let me talk to you about what that looks like. Here's how that manifests in the behaviors that people demonstrate here at Workday or in whatever company you're in. Not sure if that answers your question, but that's sort of how we think about it.
Yeah, I guess I'd share a couple of thoughts. I think when you live shared values really intensely, part of the purpose of it from my standpoint is when you don't, or when somebody doesn't, one of the 48 percenters, we'll call them, I feel like Mitt Romney, they will stand out in our culture. I know I don't know how many managers we have, but it's lots, it's hundreds, right? I know we have small-minded, insecure managers somewhere, but they stand out and they don't last long. Back to acting quickly, I think Ashley talked about. So I think that's very important. The other thing I would say regarding the failure rate that Natalie said, and the fact that that's existed for decades, right? I would share with you, I don't know that I'm any better than anybody else, probably not, in terms of beating that metric. But where I think we are better, where we stand out, is we're relentless on the people front. And I think you can get into the Business Hall of Fame, not by necessarily beating that original stat, but if you're relentless and you act on people quickly and you hug and love the people that are really performing and living your the way that you live as a company in accordance with your shared values, I think there's a lot of success in that.
Scott, I want to bring down something that you said and ask you to explain how this gets put into practice, which is I love the idea of if you have the right people, you trust and empower them. Southwest Airlines would have used more common sense than going to a policy. I also love the idea of these are the 7 things that we're doing this year. Here's our core values. And every teammate, to use your language, in the organization knows what that means specific to their job and their role.
Yep.
There's a little bit of a tension there, right? And the more specific that I make it, the more it feels like there's a policy or a metric that's bureaucratic and rigid for me. And so I'm wondering, how does that work out in terms of those two objectives, and how do they mesh?
Yeah, so the vital few and key drivers stand in contrast to the specificity of those things. So I think the goal is the part that we get right. We don't tell people necessarily how to go attack that. We leave the guardrails wide enough there. I will tell you the tension we experience is, hey, if I'm not working on one of those key drivers or one of those vital few, how important is my job? If I'm doing sustaining engineering, that's the kind of tension that we deal with because we're so overt about what we resource and what we're driving versus those things you got to kind of do to keep the trains going on time. That tension is a little bit greater than, what is that metric? 0 mortality. We want 0 mortality, but I don't tell Donna how to do that. She doesn't necessarily tell her team how to do that. That's the goal, team. Let's go figure it out. So it's more of the, I'm not working on one of those key things, how important am I really, and being able to translate that, right? That's more of the tension that we face, but I think we manage it reasonably well.
Super helpful.
But I'll say one other thing. What you can probably tell personality-wise, I will challenge that person and say, hey, look, if you want to work on a vital few, where's your idea? What is the next big thing that we should be doing that competes with every 6 months our best ideas that we're working on? Come up with that. Then we'll resource it.
If you don't mind using the microphone, thanks.
Thank you. This is Gary Zassman from Zoom Catalog. I hope you can understand my accent. My wife can talk. She's got the same accent. That won't help. Just a question from Scott. And this is maybe a simple question for you, but how do you actually develop staff? How do you make sure your staff are being developed, and what do you do to develop them? Because I don't think that's easy.
No, it's very hard.
It's easy to say develop staff.
Yeah.
I think in my corporate life, I was always told to develop staff. I never knew what the hell I was doing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Every teammate in the company, everyone, has a teammate development plan. I can talk forever about this, you guys. I got to be careful. Everybody has a teammate development plan, and that plan has only 1 or 2 skills and experiences on it, no more than that. And those skills and experiences are designed to make me more comfortable and productive and effective in my current job. And only if desired and my boss agrees are those skills and experiences going to be designed to help me get to my next desired job, right? So it is experiences, it is skills that leads to business outcomes. The mistake that most people make is they think development is on top of their day job. Development is inside of your day job. There's a company down the street called Medtronic. It used to be called Valley Lab, and I had the wonderful privilege with Donna and a couple of others to lead that company. To articulate this, there was a region manager. I'm an early bird, so I'm in the office. It's like 5:30 or 6 o'clock. He wants to show me that he's in the office, so he's pacing outside of my office so I see him. So I'm like, okay, come on in. Let's say hi. How's your teammate development plan going? Well, I've got 3 openings. I was promoted into this role. I'm going to get to it. Trust me. I really believe in this attract, retain, develop stuff. I'll get there. And I said, whoa, he clearly viewed it as being on top of his job. And I said, what's the most important thing you're doing right now? Well, I have 3 openings. Have you ever hired anybody? No. Why isn't recruiting the only skill on your teammate development plan? Light bulb, right? Let's make that specific. I'm going to hire great people. Mastery can be that simple, right? So it is inside of your job. Everybody has it. Mine currently is get better at managing Wall Street. And so that's the way we operate. And, you know, the performance appraisal, we were talking about it earlier, that is an ongoing conversation all year long about your skills and experiences that you possess. And if my next job that I want, Ashley is the boss of that, and you're my current boss, the 3 of us sitting down talking about how I get there, that's very powerful. I don't leave that company.
Take one more question.
My name is Kunta Hutabarat. Thank you for the talk. So we talk about big companies. So I want to bring it down to very small, to the startup. As the founders today, I mean, you mentioned about the core values of the founders will be the one influence the startup. So as we grow our teammates, I mean, picking your word there, what should we do? I mean, we will have a tendency to hire or find a new teammates that match with us. But at the same time, we were taught that, no, find somebody who is complement with you. So, I mean, as an organized person, maybe he or she will not choose a filler. That's totally opposite. But we know we need that. So how do we prioritize? I mean, culture fit versus diversity.
It's a great question. I'm going to put an even sharper point on it, which is, let's assume that the statistics that Natalie cited are correct in terms of failure rates for bad culture fits. That's not necessarily the full story, because it could be, yeah, this can be a massive disaster, but those people who are radically different in terms of their values, when they succeed, might result in outsized gains compared to others. And so let's combine that question as well as considering the possibility of maybe we should be occasionally looking for a culture misfit, understand that it's a high variance outcome, that they may be more likely to burn out, but if it works, this could be a big leap for the company. I'd welcome that feedback.
When we, and this is fascinating to me, that when we started RoundPeg, a lot of the conversations we would have would be from leaders saying, I don't want to create a company of clones. If I use your software, I'm just going to create a company of people that all look the same. What's fascinating to me is that makes a lot of sense that would be that concern. We stopped having that conversation. People stopped asking about that, and I don't know exactly what it's a sort of an anthropological wonder to me that stopped being a question. But if I go back, here's what we know about human beings and wiring. We need a certain amount of glue to hold us together if we're going to march ahead and march forward. And so that's specifically why I talk about 4 to 6 values. Remember you're 1 in 250 million. Like we are so unique as individuals that we're at so little risk for having far too homogeneity in terms of thought. It is a fear. It's a fear of human beings. And I did say to you, well, people hire people that look a lot like them. So there's a reality to that fear. But when we have a North Star, the flag on top of the mountain, that says these 4 to 6 values are what we're striving for. They're more of our non-negotiables. No one will have all of them. But by and large, we're looking for that to be the glue that holds us together. What we know from research is what that allows then is all of that other uniqueness of wiring, of background, of experience, of personality is additive. When we don't have glue that holds us together, a little bit of glue, we have a tremendous amount of diversity and nothing gets done. We find it as organizations very difficult to come together and move forward down a path because there's only diversity in terms of how we make decisions, how we prioritize, what we reward. And there's a good amount of anecdotal research on that path seems appealing. Like we want a lot of diversity of thought, a lot of diversity of wiring. And those organizations end up finding themselves very challenged to be productive and effective out in corporate America or the workforce at large. When we have culture alignment around a small set of values, we're so good at making sure that small set is really rigorous, that also people self-select in or out based on that cultural alignment. And the bulk of the diversity that exists beyond that ends up being a great strength for the organization.
Part of why I talk about values, and I use that word more than I do culture, is because of what you said about diversity. And I think culture can be a big, broad, vague topic, and it can be an excuse, and has been in courts. I mean, there's a lot of litigation. A lot of companies have written nice checks because they said, I'm not going to hire you because you're not a cultural fit. That actually meant you weren't a white male. And so diversity folks don't like to hear cultural fit often. That's not a good word typically. And that isn't to say you shouldn't say it. I think culture fit is really important, but it can easily get misconstrued. I think that's where values fit can be so helpful, because values are those core. They are those core anchors. I mean, if you think about if it's teammates and customers and innovation, those are core tenets that you don't have to be from a particular background or be a particular gender or have a particular religion. That's a core tenet deeply, and how that behavior manifests might be different in people. But that core, I am hell-bent on making sure our customers have innovative, great products and wonderful service. if somebody's not behind that, then they're probably not for you if that's one of your core values. And so I think if you use the values as your anchor, you won't get lost in the diversity. I think you can have a wonderful diversity of people and thought.
Scott, we'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I would totally agree with what both Natalie and Ashley said. And the way I think about it, success has nothing to do with style or personality. And I think we kind of misuse words sometimes when we have this conversation. I won't compromise on shared values. You can be an introvert, an extrovert. I don't care where you come from. I don't care what your background is. I don't care what your hobbies are. But to your point, if you don't share those values of innovation and customer, and I mean, hard to disagree with, right? So we fire based upon that. We also hire, but we fire based upon it, and it really sharpens who you are.
All right, well, we're going to have a reception in the room next door. Sean's up there. As I mentioned at the outset, this is the last Silicon Flatirons Entrepreneurship Initiative event for our academic year. Again, I want to thank Anna, Sean, Kelly, Dave Camerucci, Susanna, and others, as well as Ethan, for helping out tonight. And this was a terrific discussion. Please help me thank Scott, Ashley, and Matt.